everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Educational Measures webinar, 4 Critical Steps to Continuous Meetings Optimization. I am Brandy Plott. I will be your host today. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, we would love for you to join the conversation on social media. You can use the hashtag EventTech or EventPress, or follow us at @EdMeasures. We are also going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question at any time, please go ahead and type your question into the box in the right-hand panel. I also want to let you know that the slides will be available along with the recording within 48 hours after the webinar concludes. So look for an email announcement about that, and please feel free to share those with your colleagues that are not able to attend today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our speaker, Ryan Mazon. Ryan is the Senior Vice President of Business Development here at Educational Measures. Ryan has more than 10 years of experience in the event technology industry. He has literally traveled all over the world to help companies like yours increase participant engagement at their meetings and events and to improve the overall effectiveness of meetings. And Ryan is also a veteran. So Ryan, thank you so much for your service to our country. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy, and good day to all of our listeners and attendees for this webinar. Like Brandy said, this is 4 critical steps to continuous meeting optimization. You know, that is a very broad term. If we're looking at the critical side of this, what I've done is I've actually kind of brought this back down to manageable expectations, things that we can do in real time today when it comes to looking at optimizing our meetings moving forward, because really that's the whole name of the game when it comes to our meetings. You know, it's not, we want to make sure we get away from performing it, doing it just to do it, and how do we make these meetings better as we move along? And really, you're going to see that this is almost a formula of different pieces of actionable intelligence that are going to push us in that right direction. So with that, I'll just get started. You know, when I was looking at this, I was thinking about, you know, when I was gathering information of what I was going to speak to here, I ran across this article about structuring better meetings in the Harvard Business Review. And it was funny that they had a really long explanation about little minutia items that could help, but they summed up the whole meeting with this quote I have over here on the right is, "What people are tired of is bad meetings." Obviously, boring, circular, unproductive meetings. You know, and they're saying that you'll greatly improve by tailoring your meetings so that their objectives are aligned with the content, frequency, and duration of that meeting. That makes a lot of sense when it comes to getting the most out of what we're trying to do, because we're talking about optimization here. And you know, here's another piece of my research. Optimization defined is an act, process, or methodology of making something such as design, system, or decision as fully perfect, functional, or effective as possible. Well, we try, and everyone tries to be as perfect as they can, but that's really not necessarily always going to be the case, especially in our meetings. But if we can be effective in our meetings, that's really going to say something. I'm looking at the attendees that we have, and looking at the list of those that signed up for this webinar, and it looks like that we are covering a wide gamut of meeting types. You know, so I don't want to fall down a rabbit hole and try to be too specific on one meeting type. But if you kind of take some of these tips that we've seen doing this over a decade of data collection for our clients, and what is giving them the most bang for their buck when it comes to pulling out this information out of their attendees, is going to be really effective for you. So my motto when it comes to anything, when we start designing on anything that we want to do, when it comes to the engaging attendees, capturing information, being effective, we have to start with the end in mind. And starting with the end in mind, based on that optimization definition, is we want to get an effective meeting in place. We want to make sure that if it's a training environment, an education environment, a sales environment, a data capture event environment, what do we try to do and how can we get better to make those pieces really work for us? And what I've done, and thank you to my crack design team, is come up with, I call them the 4 pillars of process improvement. What I'm going to be talking about a lot today over the 30 minutes that we have is that we're going to use a couple of different pieces when it comes to looking at trying to expand on analyzing and getting good feedback out of our content, getting that actionable intelligence from our participants, rating our presenters and getting our presenters in line with what we want to do and the overall experience of the event for our attendees. All of those pieces, you'll notice they're all the same size, because each one of these pillars is holding up their weight of that process improvement. We can't 100% put all of our design and all of our strategy into the experience of the event, because if we're not capturing anything else, imagine this little temple here toppling over. So what we have to do is we have to kind of find that middle ground that is going to cover all of these pieces and is going to make this effective for us. So educational measures, obviously, if you're not aware, we provide that tool, the engagement tool, which is what you're looking at here. Our system, you'll see the slides, the customizable content over here on the left and interactive tools on the bottom left. What this is, it's a symbiotic approach to providing a vehicle. We do it on iPads, providing this vehicle for engagement for the attendees that's going to give us that return of those analytics, that data, where we can start to make those decisions moving forward on how to increase that process. So what I'll do now is I'm going to do a little jumping around. You'll see here there's an iPad here that it mimics what attendees would see in a meeting environment. But what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of approach each one of these pillars individually, and using technology like ours. You don't necessarily have to use ours. It is key when you're talking about process improvement is just gathering as much information as possible, because that actionable intelligence is going to allow you to make those decisions that are going to be moving you forward. So what I'll do here is I'll start with the first of my pillars, which I would say is content. When it comes to content, we are able to look at what content resonates with an audience based on the features that we give them. This is 2018, we're going into 2019, and one thing that we can all agree on is our audiences want to be heard. Our audiences want to have a voice in what is happening. And what we do is if we give them that ability to tell us what they want or what is important to them or what they want to interact with, that gives us that data back, because we can start to apply an impact scale to that information. So by doing that, we give them these functionality abilities to give us that information without forcing the issue on them. If you look at this, you'll see on our bottom left here is our interactive tools. Our number one tool is Ask a Question. Ask a Question allows for real-time dynamic feedback from the audience to what's being presented at any moment. By giving them the ability to tell us what it is about that slide that they either get, they don't get, or a comment that could expand on the content really applies to the data set. So once they submit that information, that goes into our moderator queue that looks similar to this. Those questions are coming in, and this is a really, really good way to start to identify what is happening in that room. So a lot of times we'll see a slide that'll come back, and maybe there'll be a question that will be presented through the iPad, and we'll see multiple items of those questions. This is not a scary microphone where we're asking one of our attendees to stand up in front of the whole audience and then ask a question in their own head that they might deem not as effective or a stupid question, if you will, across the room in front of all their peers. So by giving them the ability to put it into the iPad in a semi-anonymous fashion, then they're a little bit more eager to let us know what they want. So when a question comes through, we're able to see what slide was up when that question was asked, and then take that information and apply that to the follow-up when it comes to the content is really, really valuable information. All of those questions are able to be shared, and what we do is we actually have a report that we pull after each meeting right there on site that houses all of those questions that were asked. So this is one step that we can start to see if there's trends that are happening when it comes to this content, if there is items that we need to address for the next meeting. If there's a lot of questions specifically about slide 4, maybe we need to go back and look at slide 4 and optimize that a little bit. But this is giving us the beginning roadmap of how we can start to look at that information that we're putting out for our attendees and how to make that a little bit more effective. Now, if you look here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you our first kind of step into looking at the impact and how we can start to analyze that data that's coming back. Because if we think about the ability for these attendees to take notes on slides or save slides or draw notes on slides, what we're doing is we're contributing to an overall data set. That data set is going to allow us to be able to look a little bit deeper into that, because what we're doing now is based on the functionality and the engagement of those attendees into the content is we're starting to place markers on that. So if we look at if this slide was saved, and I'll just go ahead and save that real quickly, to a personal portfolio of the attendee, then we can actually go back and see what was saved by the audience as a whole. Because right off the bat, we can look at what that was presented is the most impactful based on the interactions of that audience. By getting into something like that, regardless of what else was happening, these slides drew the most attention from the audience. So if that is something that we need to expand on, or if that is something that we need to dive into a little bit deeper, maybe they got a lot of questions on the slide, so maybe we can actually clear something up that was missing in that slide. That's how we're going to start moving to that process improvement, how we make the message that we're portraying in that room more effective. So that is definitely key with this. But we can also start to think about and drill down into what was being interacted with by the interactions themselves. So if we look at something like this, why would somebody save a slide? It's maybe something they liked, they wanted to keep. Maybe they took a note on a slide because they just learned something. Or maybe they asked a question because they still don't get it. Well, that's a really good way to start looking at this, because if we're focusing in on slides that had notes, and those notes are signifying learning that the attendee is sending to themselves about these slides, then we know what is resonating with them, and we can expand on that as we move forward. This also lends itself to this information that is in our analytics platform, which is also part of this system. You'll see it looks exactly the same as that insight report that you were just looking at. However, we can actually click in and we can dive in deeper into what that information was that they sent on those specific slides. What I like to do with my clients is we like to look at the meeting overall. So each one of these is a presentation that happened in that meeting. And we go into the ones that had the most interactions. This is a really good place to start. And I have a client, I just got off the phone 2 days ago, specifically saying, Ryan, we have too many slides and we kind of need to drill down and we need to cut out some of these slides. Where should we start? This is a great place to start, because in this report on this platform, every slide that had an interaction is now included. So anything any notes that were taken, any questions that were asked on slides are going to be contributing to this report. However, if we go back and we say, well, these are the slides that had interactions, what about the ones that did not? If you notice the slide IDs, there was no interactions on slide 2 and 3. That's a really good place to start. If we had information on slides 2 and 3 and it was not requested by that audience, that's a good place to start. But what we're doing now, if you're keeping score here, is we are starting to optimize the content now, because we can see what it is about things that are saved, things that they're sending back to themselves about this information, and what things we're missing. So definitely a good place to start when it comes to looking at all of that information on the process improvement portion of the content. Now, this is another photo of that. So if we go into the participant level, so the participant level is the majority, I would say, of the data that we're going to collect, because we are gathering a lot of information when it comes to these individuals. Ask a question is a big piece of that, but also those direct question data capture tools that we have. So one of the things that is an optional feature on our system that I highly recommend doing is after a login and GDPR opt-in, what I recommend is having a gateway survey. A gateway survey is something that can pop up and knock out a lot of the items that we necessarily would need. Demographic questions, we can do pre-post questions, a priority style ranking survey, which could lend us into what are you looking to learn more about. That's going to be very effective when going back and looking at the information after the fact and planning for the next meeting, where we can say that we spent a lot of time on topic A, and the audience, before we even started, told us they were more interested in topic B. That's going to be something that's going to be very valuable in your planning for the future. Process improvement is going to be a direct link to that. And what we do now is we give them additional abilities to engage. So we talked about those surveys, but when we start talking about like polling is a direct question that we are requiring a response to. If you remember when we talked about the impact and that passive data capture that is linked to what it is that they are asking for us to send them as far as saving slides and taking notes, this is a good way to ask those specific questions, because we can say, do you understand this topic? Or if this is a training environment, now that you've heard the training, what is your response to this? And gauge the learning that is happening. So once we have that information, the attendees can click on their response, and we can actually share in that learning right there in the room. So we can see those results real time and discuss with that. Keep in mind, in the old days of polling, and polling's been around for quite a while, 88% was good enough. 88% was, we really did something well here. Because we're on this data capture tool, because we want to optimize each attendee, because we want to do all of these things that are going to move us towards process improvement, what we need to start looking at is these individuals, the 10% and the 2% on this specific question. What is it, even after the training or education or pitch, that did not resonate with those individuals? What is it that they are still lacking? By having this data capture environment in process, what we're doing now is we're able to identify those. Because if we go back to the analytics dashboard and we look at the participants of that meeting, we can see everyone and how they reacted to all of the information. So if we just click on one of these individuals here, if we go to the polling results specifically about what was being asked, we can see directly where they were lacking. This is about optimizing that attendee now. Now, if that attendee is an employee, or if that attendee is someone that we're hoping after the education, after the process, after bringing them all the way to our meeting and sending them back on their way, that they're going to get our ideas right when they leave. This is a great place to follow up with that attendee specifically, rather than following up the attendee saying, how did it go? Or do you have any questions? This is a dynamic list of what they specifically need after the event to be followed up with. So if I was following up with this individual and instead of going down the list and saying, is there anything else that you might be fuzzy on, I noticed you got something wrong. I noticed that you have that you could use a little bit more information on this topic. That would be a great place to start with them. But if we're also looking at these questions as a whole, those questions are able to, if 80% of the room got it wrong, maybe it's something that we're doing. Maybe it's the question itself. Maybe it was vague or misleading in some manner. That's a great place to start as far as gathering that information on those attendees and how to make things better for them. Our third pillar is presenters. Presenters are the voice of your information. Presenters, as you all know, as we're all professionals in this environment, a presenter can definitely kill a presentation. If they're going too fast, if they are not in tune with the audience, if they are going very slowly and reading slide by slide, we need to know that information. Because right now, if we think about how we're doing this today, This could come from staff members sitting in the back who are making a note. But are we really capturing that information to actually make them better, or is that just a quick phone call saying you need to not read the slides so much? Provide that information, capture that information, and provide it to those presenters to actually make them better. Because what we do, if you think about evaluations, as we're all used to, evaluation 3 pages stapled together, handed out at the end of the conference. And we see that they draw a line through all the 5s and they sign their name and we're done. What we've done here at Educational Measures is we've actually taken that to the next step. So we do have the ability to put the evaluation right there on the iPads. But what we're doing now, instead of just having all of that in one place, we're supplementing that as well, because what we're able to do, as you saw with those polling questions, is we have the ability to push session-specific evaluations. And you'll see I did this when we were testing, but this is the best type of information you can get because it's fresh. I don't need to remember day 1's second speaker of the day and if it was effective for me. If we can start to look at each session and the presentations of each of those sessions and the effectiveness they had on that audience, in our results are off the charts when it comes to getting the attendees to actually do this. Is a huge benefit for us, because we all know evaluations right now are king of the hill when it comes to any type of process improvement. So if we say, the presentation answered questions that I had, I agree, the content was relevant to my role, I strongly agree maybe, the presenter was clear in his or her presentation. You know what? No. Actually, they were too fast or spent too much time on the slides. By doing it this way, they're done. This typically happens after the presentation as they're getting ready for Q&A to answer all those great questions that just came into the iPad. That controlled environment of questions now that we're facilitating, but getting us that information that we need to attach themselves to that specific presenter column that we're trying to evaluate, because that is really going to be a big piece of this, is getting everyone on board. Now, we don't need to train presenters, and we all know how it goes trying to get a presenter to do things a different way. But if we can start to capture information for those presenters, excuse me, for those presenters that will make them more effective, they will listen. Our on-site report that I showed earlier also will have all that information. All of this is tabbed out for you on the bottom of each Excel report that has all of this information, all of the raw data that we capture in that meeting to get you started, specifically after the event. Finally, we think about the experience of the audience. The experience of the audience right now is the majority of any kind of decisions that we made. The experience of the attendee is only captured in a lot of environments in that evaluation. The evaluation itself, how was your flight? How was your travel? How was your hotel room? Those things are going to be effective. They definitely have a piece. However, where we're at right now as an industry is the place for ROI. And if you think about when we go back and we review those evaluations, we really are looking for the bad comments. I mean, what does that say about where we're at when we're coming to making the decisions on comments that may or may not be one-off? I had a client. That client got one review on one evaluation somewhere that said it was hard to type on the iPad. And what they did was they reacted to that information, and they reacted to that information by sending wired keyboards with these iPads around the globe at a huge cost. Well, once we started going back and we started looking at that information and that specific feedback in the analytics platform, we realized that it was not necessarily that valuable, because now we can see all of their results side by side. And what we were doing is, not only did they not like typing on the iPad, they didn't like the cab ride in, the food was cold, the hotel room stunk. So what we've just done is we've identified and we placed a value on those comments coming back. What we should be doing is looking at the things that are working, The things that are working, we definitely want to keep an eye on those, expand on those, and make those carry over meeting to meeting. Because a lot of this is going to be tracked. If we start the data process, each meeting itself is going to have value. But when we start looking at the meetings overall, that is where we're going to start to be able to make wholesale changes, benchmarking of our processes. What's working for us, what isn't working for us, looking at these meetings side by side and saying, well, whatever was working in this meeting, we definitely need to take those lessons and use them on another meeting that maybe struggled a little bit. So having that data, having that actionable intelligence is going to get you started down this path to all of this process improvement, because it's definitely a big piece of the pie to have all of these functions working together, monitor the content, monitor your participants, rate your presenters, and keep manageable expectations in your experience are going to move this whole pie, the whole meeting process, into a improvement scenario. Because really that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep everything moving in an effective and manageable way to get us towards that optimization. It's never going to be perfect, but if we can identify those things that are keeping us from approaching that, that is really what we're trying to do. Finally, I put our link. This, as Brandy said at the start, this webinar, this very quick introduction to process improvement using these 4 pillars, this will be included on our website. If you want to write down this information of www.educationalmeasures, we have a lot of information on there, specifically driving into a lot of different areas that'll allow you to see ebooks or webinars or success stories that might be able to drive you in the right direction and expand on this just a little bit more.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. I think we have time to take a few questions. If you have not submitted your question and you have one, go ahead and write your question in the box at this time. Looks like we have, Ryan, do you want to start with Michelle Bradley?
Yes, I will. So thank you very much for the questions. One question asked was, do you recommend breaking up the survey during the overall meeting instead of at the end? What I say is do them both. So what we want to do is we want to keep as many lines of interaction open. Keeping those lines of interaction open means having this overall evaluation at the living on the iPads in our system. But also hitting them with those evaluation questions, each session specific. The reason is that they are more likely to do it and give us better information when it's broken up and it's pushed at individual rate. However, if they need to step out, or maybe they miss it, or maybe they're in a conversation with their neighbor, and they don't actually answer it at that point, they still have the ability to go back and evaluate anything that they missed, because our system will save those responses, as you see here. So as they go, so it'll contribute to an overall evaluation that would be that they'll be able to see as they go. Another question here is, if an attendee takes note on slides, what do they get sent to them? So we really push this deliverable when it comes to the audiences, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to feed that nature that they want something from us. That would be notes, their stylist notes, any save slides they do, because what that's going to do is it's going to give them the initiative to start interacting with more and more content that happens on these slides, which is contributing to one of those 4 pillars as we go. What we do is we take all of that information back to our home office. Our data security team actually pulls that information off the servers. We are not a Wi-Fi system, so all of this is done in a very secure environment. We pull that information and our system automatically generates these emails that will be a PDF of their slides and their notes that they took. That is all a managed process. If we have slides that are not to be released, we can remove them and replace them with placeholders. But the language is actually from our clients. So it's typically, thank you very much for coming. We hope you had a wonderful experience. Please click here to download your notes, which is that PDF. That is a very effective tool, not only because we're actually, these emails are being anticipated by our attendees, but they're looking forward to them, and they are going to let you know if they don't get them. So I recommend to my clients is why not put some other information on those emails as well. To learn more about XYZ, click here. To complete your evaluation if you didn't have the ability to on site, that's also an ability for them as well. Can you use the data? Another question here is, can you use the data collected for predictive analytics, learner profiling? How has this been used by pharmaceutical companies? Well, being vague, specifically for the webinar purposes, this is definitely used in all scenarios. It's not at predictive yet. You're not going to get to predictive until we can get some outcomes from that. Giving some, you can actually start to finagle that in a way, if you will, by the questions that you ask. So if you do say things like, how are you currently approaching this issue, and give your education, and then ask them that same question again. Now, after hearing this learning, how will you react to this scenario? That's a really good place to start to see if you are actually adjusting people based on the education into the right avenues that they want. This is done a lot with CME and pre and post data. And that's definitely a good place to start. We can have these conversations outside the webinar environment, but based on the scenario of the client and the meeting type that is happening in a training scenario. I guess I can go this way. In a training scenario where we need our attendees to leave knowing the process of what we're expecting them to do. Having this information and asking them as they go through the day, do you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand? The points that they are not getting or they're getting wrong in knowledge check questions are a great place to start with them to specifically follow up. And if you'd like to reach out to me about that, I would definitely love to kind of dive in a little bit more in a specific environment and talk about that with you as well. I got some more questions here. Thank you all for typing questions into the, thank you for putting these questions in here. Question is, how do you get presenters to develop or add polling questions to a normal presentation? That is a question that comes up a lot because we know that our speakers are very, very busy, and whatever we can get from them, when we can get from them, is a standard in the industry. So what I propose, and what I do propose with a lot of my clients, is to be proactive about that. If it's the idea of the session, the facilitators now can come up with their own polling questions that they would insert after a presentation or before a presentation. Typically, when presenters, and this happens a lot, when they see the ability to poll, even if they were introduced to that earlier in the process, who did not submit questions, will actually come back and submit questions during the day that we can ask during their presentation. So if you can get your presenters to include polling questions, those direct questions, we're not locked down on needing that information because we're going to be able to apply the impact in those other areas based on how the attendees engaged with the content that was presented. Great. Well, I think just for time, I'm going to end here. If you have any questions at all, or you would have any other information that you would like to see, please feel free to reach out. My email is rmazon@educationalmeasures.com. Again, please look at our resource library on www.educationalmeasures.com. There is a great list of helpful information in there, specific items that you can use to optimize your meetings and really move your meetings into the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. Just a reminder, everyone, that this webinar recording and the slides will be available within a couple of days' time, and it will also be posted on our resource page. So thank you so much for joining us, and hope all of you have a great day.